Hi everyone, I'm Scott Schneider. This is Stereo Niche. And this week we're going to talk about what's been selling in the audio collectible market. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about vintage audio collectibles. I've been a collector. I've mentioned this a few times. I've been a collector all my life, pretty much, although I didn't start collecting again in earnest until 15 years ago, a little more than that at this point. And but there's some early learning that I established when I was a comic book collector many years ago, back in the 70s. And what I learned at that point in time was that while comic books, which was my arena at the time, were collectible, there was a huge amount of variability in what was highly collectible versus being sort of mediocre or not really collectible at all. Those same principles apply to any collectible category, and they apply to vintage audio as well. So there are a few things that I wanted to sort of talk about and share in this video. Just like comic books, where first editions and first appearances are always the most important aspect of collectability and valuation, that holds true here in vintage audio, in collectible cars, in art, in just about any category. In vintage audio, it's the top of the line models are always going to have the most collectability. So I'll use the Nakamichi 1000 ZXL as an example. So while Nakamichi made a lot of different models, they only had one top of the line. And the Nakamichi 1000 ZXL was the top of the line for many years, and it was quite exceptional. Now, because it was top of the line, it was also the most expensive, and being the most expensive, it sold the fewest units. So naturally, it's going to have be more rare than others. Now, in addition to the 1000 ZXL, the regular one, they sold a limited edition one that was even more limited and more expensive and more rare. So those even go up a notch further. But the other Nakamichi models were also great. There were lots of models from the 600 series, the 500 series. They made a lot of excellent units, but they were appealing to a larger segment of the population who had those financial resources. So there were a lot more units being sold for those. Therefore, the market doesn't, reward the seller with higher dollars for those because there's a lot more supply than demand. So that always comes into play. And if you're going to be a collector and you expect to sell your units, and if you want to focus on maintaining the value of it, then you have to focus on those types of units that are going to be more rare if you want to make sure that you retain that value. Now, collectors don't always focus on value. You can focus on other aspects of it. You can focus on, you just want to own all of the Nakamichi line, say from 1975 to 1980, and you might want to collect them all just because you want to fill in a space on your wall that you're trying to fill in with that collection. So we all have different goals, but if your goal is to maximize the value of it, those are some things to keep in mind. Now, I mentioned this because recently I've seen some or heard and talked to some folks that are a little befuddled, I'll say, by some market conditions. When you're selling items, if you're going to sell and you want the highest valuation, then you have to sell it where that valuation can be obtained. And that is on a national selling platform like an eBay or a Reverb or something along those lines. What you will not be able to do in most cases is sell it locally on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and sell it for an amount that you can sell it for on eBay. Buyers are savvy. They're not inexperienced themselves. So most of the time, you're not going to be able, the problem I see is most sellers, when they're complaining about selling things, is that they're not able to get an eBay price and sell it locally. Well, eBay has a fee. You're going to pay 15 to 20%. eBay offers a 90-day warranty, and it's a national global market. with those things in mind, why would you expect to get that kind of valuation for selling it locally? It doesn't make any sense. So think about that when you are trying to sell something locally and it's not selling. Maybe you need to price it appropriately. The converse of that, of course, is you need to buy it at the right price to begin with. So if you have spent too much on something and overbought, overpaid for it, you've got a problem from the beginning. So it's important to buy smart first so that you can sell later. The other things to consider in the vintage audio collecting arena are what you're collecting. I've mentioned some of these comments before, but smaller units like receivers and things typically are a little easier to sell. Now it becomes more challenging when you get to bigger, heavier units. It becomes a challenge to ship them. So selling them locally for a much bigger, a monster receiver, let's say, it's going to be harder to ship that, or at least ship it safely, than something that's much smaller and much lighter. So, that's something to consider. Large speakers become, on the other end of that category, on the spectrum, they're extremely hard to sell. If you have a very large speaker, for one, it's a much smaller market that's going to be interested in a very large speaker. Just not as many buyers. You have to be sort of really into the hobby, and I'll say most of the time it's going to be an older client, older buyer that relished those speakers when they were young, someone like me, that was interested in those speakers to begin with. And not as many buyers. I think there's a lot more market for younger folks who have gotten into the hobby. Vinyl is one reason they've got into the hobby, so turntables have a high demand right now, and receivers to hook them up to. But as far as speakers, I think a lot of times it depends on the size of the speaker in a lot of cases. So again, it's important to know your market, know what your local selling market is like, and evaluate that accordingly to where and how you can sell the gear that you're trying to move on. So in the conversation here, what I wanted to get to was actually talking about what's been selling. And I do that every month or so. I take a look at what's sold in the marketplace, and I always look at what's sold over $5,000 because that's some really interesting, cool stuff in that category. And so let's do that now. I've taken kind of a snapshot of several different items, and let's walk through those and see what people are buying. Where's the Macintosh MC275? So this one sold for something less than $5,100, let's say. It looks like they were accepting best offer. But this unit is quite exceptional. I don't know if this was a reissue. I'm not that up to speed on Macintosh units. I know that at some period of time they had reissued some. This one was either reissued or it looks to have been completely rebuilt. You can buy newly made chassis and things that pretty much make them new. That's the best benefit of Macintosh, is that you can pretty much get anything you want. If you want to rebuild an old unit, the parts are available, and that's the huge benefit of buying Macintosh gear. So this is the 275, 2 channels, 75 watts, and you can just see every picture here. It really does look like pretty much new, and in fact it even has an original box. The other thing, not just parts, but you can also call Macintosh and buy boxes specific to your unit as well. So if you have an old unit, you're missing a box and you'd like one, you can call them up and they'll send you one that's form fitted for your particular unit. Going to be pretty expensive, of course, but if you want to take care of your gear, there's nothing better than an original box. Here's a Yamaha. This is a B1. And it says it's completely restored, and this one came out of the Czech Republic. It says it was a best offer, so something less than $6,000. But I've never seen one of these units myself. Quite cool looking. Not familiar with the power output of this particular unit, but looks like the seller took some great pictures here. I should have mentioned that on the Macintosh as well. Took some great shots and pictures, and looks like they really staged it pretty well and showcasing it for the category of the unit that they're presenting it as. And that dollar amount, to me, you should present it as such and not skimp on taking good pictures. Now here's a really cool unit, a JBL, an extremely rare JBL Paragon prototype. So I'll talk about, and as far as prototypes are concerned, I've run across a few prototypes over the years. And prototypes, for the most part that I've seen, at least for vintage audio, don't typically bring any, any real value above. And in fact, the ones I've seen have been hardly valuable at all. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're pre-production units. And that means they could have parts in them that didn't make it into production. And you may not have, you probably don't have a schematic for it. And so it might be a unit that you just can't really use and you won't be able to get repaired. Different for the Paragon. The Paragon, JBL, for one, this period is exceptionally collectible. Anything from this time frame JBL, just know that it's going to have some market interest. Now you're talking about the Paragon, which is an iconic speaker, and all the parts in it, in this case especially, are what made it into the normal release of Paragons. Now combine that with the fact that it's the early prototype unit, and it's only probably one, or maybe there's two of them ever in existence, but they're the very first origins of this iconic series. So I think for that reason it sold for an exceptional amount, which is much more than I think the typical Paragon sells for, which I think, if I recall, anywhere from say 15 to 25,000 I think is normal Paragon range. And this one looks to have sold for a good premium over that. And I'm sure it has all to do with its rarity. Now, they went on and showed some of the confirmation here of what made it a prototype. It was stamped as such with Proto. They probably have, some documentation somewhere as well. Maybe some confirmation from JBL, the company itself, along the way. Here are the drivers. This company does a great job. They're a specialist at selling and collecting this, this kind of high-end gear. They're located in California, which has an exceptional amount of high-end, highly collectible gear just because of the era that this was sold. There were a predominant number of, wealthy people out there in California. And so there's a lot of this that's hit the market out that way. They've shown off all the individual drivers, and not a surprise from a company like this that focuses on, I'll say, marquee type pieces. Now here's the Nakamichi 1000 ZXL Limited. Now the Limited is the gold face version. I have a couple of the regular black face, but the Limited was the sort of exceptional gold face units. And what I find interesting is how many have hit the market, it seems like, in the last 6 months or so. I saw one just, I think, a few months ago that sold for, it was maybe 15, 16,000, and if I recall, it wasn't working. So here's another unit sold for a single bid of 11.5. This one seems to be in better physical shape. The cabinet did seem to have some dings on it, but that's okay. You can get a cabinet the wood cabinet refinished, but the metal components here, the face anyway, seems to be in great shape. And they took some nice up-close shots of it, so you can get some detail here, and pretty cool. Offhand, I don't know how many of these limited versions were made. If anyone knows that, if you could put that in the comments, that would be great. This also included a Nakamichi noise reduction processor as well. I don't have those particular units. Now here's the Pioneer SX 1980. And anytime I'm pretty much reviewing an over, so my list, my criteria typically is what sells for over 5,000. And invariably, there's typically an SX 1980 in that. What I find kind of unusual in this case is that it sold for 11,000 and didn't get much in the way of decent pictures here. This thing is sitting on some scaffolding in a hallway or something, and just kind of surprising to me that it would sell for that amount with this level of effort from the seller. So kind of disappointing, to be honest with you, that it would sell for that amount doesn't even look like it was plugged in. So not the best example. Here's a Pioneer RT909. Now, all the RT909s are exceptional reel-to-reels, but there are some extreme enthusiasts out there that go way above and beyond. They strip these units down completely and rebuild them, but at the same time, they anodize and black anodized all the aluminum parts. So they make them into these sort of black units. This one they're calling the Black Stone Edition, and from a company called Alter Ego Appearance. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for this particular series from Pioneer in general, but I remember about 12 years ago, I had an RT909. It was not in great shape. It was non-working, so I ended up parting it out. And I remember all the front pieces were bought by a fellow in Germany, I believe he was. And he relayed back then, he was in the process of rebuilding them, and he would anodize them just like this and put them all back together and resell them. This company does an exceptional job. It looks like brand new, and they've taken some excellent pictures here. It looks like, basically a re-release is what it looks like, but I'm sure these are rebuilt units from original ones, but they've just gone through them completely and turned out some gorgeous looking units here. There's a Nakamichi DAT 1000. Not a unit I've seen before. I knew Nakamichi made digital audio tape decks, but I've never seen this particular unit. Quite cool. That remote is quite impressive. The rest of the units are pictures are not. The pictures of the actual unit are not impressive. That's kind of disappointing. Quite a cool unit though, and they've got another picture here at the end of the brochure, but it was called the Pinnacle of the Audio Tape Recording Art. I have a few DATs tapes that were made by a professional, but not something I've ever actually leveraged. It's kind of interesting that it didn't take off. More so, the CD eclipsed it, of course, but because you could make your own tape, I was always surprised that it didn't gain more traction. Now here's some JBL drivers. Again, I mentioned this earlier. Any JBL of this time frame, which would have been 1950s, pretty much early 60s, they are highly collectible. I have the same drivers that I showed when I reviewed the Hartsfield not too long ago. And these are the same drivers that are in the Hartsfield, with the exception of the crossover here. But here's the 375 compression drivers and the 154C woofers that would have come in to the Hartsfield and the Paragon. Here's the Fisher 125 monoblocks. Never seen these before, but these are quite cool. I've read about them, but I've never seen a set in person. These sold for something under $5,500. The seller did an excellent job here staging them, taking the time to take some very nice quality pictures. Look at that. That's a really cool looking unit. I'd love to have find a set of these at some point. These are in exceptional shape. They have some wear, but it looks like they've been well taken care of over their lifespan, which is at this point over 60 years, and they look great. I think these are, to me, they just look cool. I love gear from this time frame. I do. I just love, especially this sort of gold and burgundy. For some reason, that just sort of appeals to me. It's a little different than some of the receivers that you see from Fisher, just a little bit unique. All right, well, those are the things that I picked out for this go-round. I mentioned this before, that I do this periodically, and I just take a quick look at what's been selling above the 5K mark. And I do that because typically you'll find some kind of cool things that you may not have seen before. But in this case, you saw a lot of the same brands that you're pretty familiar with. Macintosh, of course, early 70s era Pioneer, very early JBL. We even saw Yamaha in there this time. So those are the kinds of brands in that time frame that I think will always be collectible. SX 1980, it's always going to be in that list. It was the top, biggest model, biggest bad boy that Pioneer made. And they are always going to be rare and they're always going to be sought after. Now, I was even surprised that this one sold for that amount, given the lack of effort, I will say, in trying to sell it. I would like to see a seller put in a little more effort there and take some pictures. I don't even think the unit was turned on in the pictures I saw, but in any case, it still shows that the units are highly desirable. Early JBL, always late 50s, early 60s JBL is always going to be collectible. All of it was made at such a high quality and is well regarded that it's always going to be well sought after. So always look for it if you're out and about. And let's see, what else was in there? Early Fisher, the Fisher tube stuff. Now I mentioned the early solid state Fisher is highly collectible, but the early tube gear from Fisher, especially the monoblocks, I find them to be quite rare. So I'd love to find a set. That was something unique in this particular review, is that we don't often see the monoblocks like that. You see them from McIntosh quite a bit. Marantz, of course, is always collectible in that configuration, but you don't see the Fisher and the Scotts very often, so it was good to see those. I think that's it for this week. Wanted to share a few thoughts with you, show you some of the stuff that's out there. I'm a collector, so I sort of keep a lookout for these sorts of things, and wanted to show you guys some of the stuff I take a look at periodically. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give us a thumbs up. If you like that video or don't want to miss the next one, hit subscribe. As always, thank you guys for tuning in.